try to include in my stories, as well as disabilities, because my family history, we've had, people with disabilities, not just, my daughter, and so it's always been very much on the forefront, because I got tired of seeing, when you're talking about disabilities, there are two main things that are very prevalent. I'm not saying that there are not others that are more balanced, but they're very prevalent. You have somebody who's blind. Well, they have a superpower that kind of compensates for their blindness, or whatever, whatever. And that irritated me, because in one of the first books that really took off for me was The Edge of the Universe. I have an elderly blind man. And there is a situation where the elderly blind man is the hero, because he's the only one who can rescue my main protagonist, so he can go on with his mission.
Fight Medusa.
So it's one of those things that is just like, an amputee girl, whether it's all these different age things. So it's just, it was one of my pet peeves that I wanted to attack in my writing.
So it's still not fulfilled, but it's a start.
It's still not fulfilled, because we have such a long way to go.
Alvin, how did you dream this? Is it coming to fruition?
Truthfully, as a white teenage boy reading science fiction, I didn't notice it, because everything was written for me.
Right.
I just was clueless. Then I started reading some Heinlein that showed strong female protagonists, and it was like, wow, that makes sense. This is something I should have thought of. And of course, in later years, Heinlein did some really.
He went real everything that was like.
But and he went totally sexist for a while there too. So trying not to talk about. But then somewhere in the 80s, I got into the science fiction community, started coming to cons, and realized, like, wow, this is a diverse group. I mean, this was what it was supposed to be like. And I still didn't really notice it in the writing. So bad on me that my writing still didn't show this. But now as a publisher, I try to pay attention. As a matter of fact, what I try to do as a publisher is ignore the bios, ignore the names. I don't even want to know if it's a male or female. I want to read the story. And then if I have several good stories that are really good, like, okay, who has done something and who is a diverse character or writer that's done something, I'll pick them first if I can.
And I actually like that you said that, because I'm a school teacher, and so sometimes there's a learning through doing. And just by you talking about how you assembled your your collection of short stories, your anthology, you thought of diversity. Just by doing it, you said, I can't have 5 cat stories or whatever it is. So that's important. So I like that. I hadn't thought about that. So, and
well, for me, it started. I am old. I'm not going there right now. So for me, it started. I was a suburban kid who went to a downtown high school.
Okay.
Jesuit high school, not unlike Georgetown Prep, unfortunately.
No parties.
But we don't have any Supreme Court justices that came from my high school, and it was a downtown high school that was, for its time, very culturally and racially diverse. And a lot of downtown kids and a lot of suburban kids. And then that was the 60s. And I was involved in as much as a white high school Jesuit educated kid could be. I was involved in the movement toward equal rights for African Americans. I was marching and carrying signs.
Well, thank you.
Because it was the 60s. I joined the NAACP, still a member.
All right.
And all of that is where I got started. And then in the 70s, starting in 1969, I have a Down syndrome child. And suddenly I was very aware of lack of inclusiveness for the intellectually disabled, for mentally retarded people. And that got me involved in all sorts of fights to make sure he had access that he had every right as a citizen to have. And then I got married to a very strong woman, and we have a daughter who's a very strong woman, and they browbeat me to the point where I began to understand. My wife was a civil engineering major at the University of Florida when she was the only female civil engineering major at the school. So that's when she started, in the late 1970s. And she left Embry-Riddle because they told her she wanted to be a pilot, and they told her women cannot be fighter pilots. And she had a big blow up and left and went to Florida to be a civil engineer, where at least she was able to get into the program. So, eventually, I'm happy to learn from people who can teach me things. That includes my son, my wife, my daughter, my friends. And so I have an anthology coming out shortly of reprints of famous alternate history stories. There are 17 writers, and 9 or 10 of them are women who don't get enough credit for some wonderful alternate history that they've done. And there's Nisi Shawl is in it. There's all sorts of interesting, diverse writers writing all sorts of interesting, diverse things on that, which really made it a great joy to put that anthology together.
I need to submit next time.
So,
all right, Brandy.
Well, I think I know why I'm here now. So,
Let's hear it.
actually, I went to an all-girls Catholic school called Academy of the Holy Names in downtown Tampa. Sucked massively, but someday we'll be able to go to a reunion, but it's fine. Actually, I actually have multiple graduate degrees, and I've taken a lot of time to do cultural diversity studies. So I've had some experiences like being one of 2 gringas, essentially, in a class of Latin American music. And actually hearing from other students, you know what we're really upset about? We are so upset that everybody just says, oh, you're Hispanic. No, I'm Cuban, I'm Puerto Rican, I'm Peru, I'm Peruvian, and that we tend to lump everybody together. And then I also, in a different graduate program, took a course on education and its ability to defranchise particularly African Americans, but how it was used against the poor initially, really kept away from the poor, and then after the Civil War in America, public schools, oftentimes that would help both the poor and African American, the freed slaves, were closed or discriminated against, etc. So, I mean, it's just a little bit of what I've studied, but when I talk about this in humanities, we talk about the 70s, well, the 60s are the civil rights movement, gets everything rolling. More civil rights and women's rights come out in the 70s again. The 80s, which is the time period that I begin to remember a little bit more, was supposed to be cultural inclusion. So I actually talked to the students about, you watch cartoons from the 70s, particularly superhero and sci-fi, and they're all interchangeable, like 6 white guys and Wonder Woman, essentially is what it boils down to. And then it shifts in the 80s to this culturally inclusive group, but you have Black Vulcan, you have who was the Japanese samurai guy, but who did the wind, and you had G.I. Joe with Spirit, who was the most stereotyped Native American figure I can possibly ever think of. And so even though this was culturally inclusive, it was very much from a white perspective.
Right.
And so you had this mixed reaction from groups saying, oh, thank heavens, I'm finally seeing somebody like me.
But you're not.
But wait, what's this? I'm Native American, I'm growing up on a reservation, 55% poverty rating, gang violence, teenage birth, high alcoholism, high dropout rates, and I'm supposed to be like this guy,
Who never comes to a reservation?
Which is real. He did once. I actually did. I ended up watching some of the series.
And gave out turkeys.
It gets complicated. It's fine. But and the 90s tries to kind of equalize that, but I think you kind of see some fading away. The 80s actually had to push back. You had to get Beloved, Toni Morrison.
Mm-hmm.
Morrison.
Not Morissette.
Morrissette, I'm sorry.
That's a singer.
That's Atlanta.
That's a hybrid. That's a hybrid. Oh, sorry.
This is the late end, middle October, and I'm a ghost hunter, so this is like my 15th presentation this month. It's fine. But anyway, who writes Beloved as a pushback, right? Because African American authors are not being published, and you're not getting this perspective and kind of the ripples that this created. The 90s, I don't know, .com industry, grunge, whatever. But I think now we're starting to see some inclusiveness and at least true efforts towards it. So in the comic book industry, we had a Muslim, a Pakistani American with Miss Marvel. So I teach religious diversity in comic books as one of my classes. So we have an overweight character who's coming out, and I've only seen one article on it. I've not
Fat
seen
Mama?
the book. She's
There's a couple of them. There's
But this was, I think, through a mainstream publisher.
You mean
so
that new
she's-
superheroine, right?
Yes, yeah, the
I
blonde.
think the name of the character in the comic is just like a woman's first name. I don't,
Yeah, it's something really odd, and I haven't
Yeah.
seen the book yet, so I can't
a
evaluate
juicy
that.
name. Probably.
You know, we start seeing the Green Lanterns diversifying. So now we've got Hispanic, African American, Hal Jordan, who will never die. You know, but we're starting to see at least the core, you know, transforming and changing. So I think there's a definite effort. I just don't know how well they're doing yet.
Okay, so now I have a list of questions, and because we are all good thinkers, we are good communicators, and we have a lot of ideas, you've covered a couple of my questions individually, but I may backtrack because I want to hear a little bit more. And this is kind of the soapboxy political panel, okay? Because diversity is a political sort of issue, right? So the soapbox question, and I'm probably going in reverse order this time, since you finished, but I think you covered a little bit of it. Seems like we all wanted diversity on this panel. I didn't want to ask what's the reason why you wouldn't want it. You probably wouldn't be on the panel if you didn't want it, okay? Because there's definitely some pushback. And to address that pushback, right, what is our arguments really for diversity? Why did we want it? You know, we talked about what we envisioned. And Rick, you talked about your son and your experiences. And I know for me, I am from New York area. I was born in the Bronx and live in Miami now. And it's a different type of diversity. And for me, diversity is, I always view, I think it was Mayor David Dinkins in New York who said, and this might not even be him saying it, but I think it was the first time I heard somebody say, I don't want America to be a melting pot. I want America to be a salad bowl. And why do I want America to be a salad bowl? Well, we'll get into more of it, but I like food. I'm a foodie, right? I'm on a diet. I lost like 5 pounds since September. I'm really battling it, but one thing writing full time is kind of hard on your energy level. You know, burning calories. So I do like my authentic Chinese food. I like tasting food from around the world, and I don't want American chefs to make it. Can you understand what I'm saying? And so I want my Chinese people to have familiarity with their culture, to have familiarity with Mandarin, with their cultural behaviors. That's when I really meet it, and I want to make that energy. So it's like I want my tomatoes to taste like tomatoes. I don't want them to taste like the rest of the vegetables in the soup. You know, I don't want us all to become American. I want us to stay internationally assembled. However, I want us to have a unifying opportunity to work together with each other. So that's what I like. And when you talk about different perspectives, boom, that's my argument for diversity. What is your argument for diversity?
So you've actually hit on 3 things. One is postmodernism, which is actually reworking the historic voice. So we're starting to hear historic rewrites and different people's perspectives on what happened when and where, rather than kind of the winner's perspective. The second thing that you're hitting on is pluralism, which is something I talk about with religion quite a bit. So how in the world do we maintain the idea that everybody has the right to be happy? We do not have the right to impede on other people's happiness, even if it makes us unhappy, and we also have the right to be happy. So the American dream is already confusing. So you have to go back to the Enlightenment era and try to play with that. So how do we deal with pluralism? The third thing is globalization. So globalism is another thing that we've all had to deal with, and I'm writing a paper right now that called it something like postmodern liberalism. Instead of actually having everybody come together, what it's done is there's been pushback from the public sphere so that everybody is becoming privatized. They're going into their private sphere. They're not engaging with others. We're segmenting as a population further and further.
Oh, no.
And it's very grim. We're a series
dystopian.
of narcissistic, depressed individuals, essentially. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess that's true. Check. So the whole globalization notion, this idea that we're a united world, but how do we unite as a world, this pluralistic, generalized idea while maintaining our culture and tradition?
The Federation of Planets.
That's it. That's Star Trek. That's why I'm so mad at Gene Roddenberry these days, because I'm like, you fed me this. This is what I believed would happen. And here we are, and it hasn't happened. So I think we're really, initially I thought we were rolling back to the 80s. I think now we're actually being pushed back to the 50s in our cultural diversity.
We got to make sci-fi great again.
Really?
I'm sorry, y'all. I'm a writer. I had it was coming. But there you have it. The optimistic view is there's always more future than there is past. So stay optimistic.
Yeah.
I like to make sci-fi great again. All right, Rick, what's your argument? You don't have to go on long. You don't have to write your essay.
All right, so
don't feel intimidated.
eventually this is going to lead us to cultural appropriation, which is a really
Watch out, Iron Fist. Oh, I'm sorry.
it's really,
Did I say that? I'm sorry.
really
Asian
sorry.
Hulk.
From my perspective, maybe talking about affirmative action. There was a time period when I was at USF, and the Oracle, as the press often does, the Oracle was the school paper. I was the advisor, and this is around 1990. And the school paper was sort of trying to lead the way to be more inclusive. And there was a letter to the editor that I thought was written by a student, and I thought it was brilliant. It was talking about affirmative action and equal opportunity. And it was pointing out that you could look at it as a sprint in a track meet. And that is, when everybody lines up to start that sprint, they're not all equal. Some have had the opportunity to have a great deal of training.
Yes, that's that exercise they have, that commercial or something like that.
And some in this metaphoric race have grown up in a situation where they had little or no opportunity to ever train to be in that race. And now you're going to put them in a situation where saying, well, we're all starting equal, but you're not starting equal. You're starting way behind based on economic factors or health factors or gender issues or anything. You're behind. And I thought that made great sense to me. So I think for affirmative action to work, you have to work on a society that prepares you to take advantage of equal opportunity when the equal opportunity arrives. And that's a lot of heavy lifting for society.
And it actually provides equal opportunity and doesn't just give it lip service.
Well, yeah, by realizing all of the handicaps that people have, whether they're cultural, physical, intellectual handicaps they have. So you can't just, I mean, sure, you could take my Down syndrome son and put him on the starting line for a 100-meter race, and I'll be there a little while later when he finishes the race,
right.
and he'll be very happy that he ran the race. But that was not an equal thing for him, right? So if you follow that metaphor, it's an issue where society has to do better to prepare everyone to be ready to, in a society that demands competition, which is what we do in this country. You have to be ready to engage in that.
Well, let me just expand on what you're saying, and I think just to follow the spirit, because I'm a child of the 60s, only the fact that I was born in the 60s, right? So I got that spirit. That's what the energy was in the bedroom, right? When they made me, when I was formed, right?
Oh, we got it.
I can hear the music in my head.
Yes. But you're saying affirmative action, and that begs for diversity. And then you're saying that the ground for affirmative action needs to be more of a focal point. But then the affirmative action, is that beneficial for everybody? Is that a good thing? I think it certainly is.
Yeah.
But what is your answer? Why is it so good to have that? Have that Federation of Planets?
Why is it good to give equal? Because we're all equal.
Well, that
America.
affirmative action eliminates bias, right? The tossing out.
Well, no, it doesn't. It compensates for
for bias, or it tries to to
tries to
compensate for
bias.
Yeah.
So
And I'm
once
saying that
once it's eliminated, and that was the goal,
Yeah.
why is that that you know, everybody's name tag being at the same line? Why is that a good thing?
well, it's a good thing in a lot of ways for the nation.
Okay, tell me.
Unless, well, we have a choice. We can be, you know, 1980s and 1970s and 80s South Africa, or we could be the inclusive United States of America, where our citizens all feel that they have an opportunity to reach that classic American dream.
And I think that part of it is a very important part. Going back to what the American dream was, and that equal belief in it.
Equal belief in it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's what
Yeah,
you're saying.
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay,
Right.
so Alvin, did you want to add on something?
I was going to say it's hard with the American dream because in order to have the American dream, you only have to have 5% of the population achieve it. We're not even at that 5% anymore. This is why the millennials are coming up and they're so cranky and depressed. It's because they're losing faith in that American dream.
I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, I don't know what dream that was. Go ahead,
So the
educate
American
me.
dream that we all have the ability to be economically mobile, to go up in the ranks based on hard work and dedication, right? This idea that you can be anything that you want to be in America, which I'm not sure is really panning out the way it used to.
Well, that's a different point. So that's why we're here. That's why we were asking this. So Alvin, what is your, why should we have this
Well,
this
to
diversity?
build on a little bit of what Rick said is
Yes.
the idea that if our society did understand the differences in the starting points and not just compensated for it, but accepted it and said, hey, we got to give everybody a chance to be the best they can be. I mean, it's let's go back to the food analogy, is like if you sit down for lunch, I want soup and salad.
Right.
If you want to melt in there, you should be allowed to. If you want to stay your own way, and if we do this all together and we have both the diversity and the melting and Americans and our individual cultures, we're so much better.
And all
Everything
of the food
so
is going to
much
have to
better.
grow at different times, right? Like I told my son, I was like, I made a meal for him, and I said, the goal of the meal is for all the food to be cooked in the dish at the same time, so you can eat a warm dish. So when you cook stuff, you got to remember this takes a little bit longer, so you got to put this on, and you have to choreograph it because he's a food competition TV show watcher. He loves that.
We need
So
to choreograph our society.
so you're
we all
right.
get to the point.
I'm going to add that into my analogy. You never know, I might have a whole book. Okay, Glenda.
You know, kind of interesting that I wound up on this panel at work. Now, I work for a bank. It's one of the largest global banks on the planet. And just walking through several rows of chairs, you can cross 3 or 4 continents at a swipe.
Wow.
And I was talking with a
It's a
gentleman.
World Bank. I'm sorry.
Yeah, definitely. I was talking with a gentleman who was from the Ukraine. He was born under the rule of the USSR, and we got to talking about diversity. And because we have to take all these special classes about how to interact with other cultures, because that is our, employee base, how not to offend each other and all of that sort of stuff. And Sergey was pointing out to me, he said, in America, he says, you have a have the freedom of speech. And he says, if you have the freedom of speech, you're going to get offended because of what somebody may say. He says, under the USSR, he says, when that was enforced, he says, you were not allowed freedom of speech, so therefore you could not offend somebody. And it just kind of
Sure.
Kind of shook me a little bit. And we've thrown out some things about society and about then. I just want to bring it back to reality here for a minute. Society is us.
Right.
We have the power to change. We have the power to look at ourselves and say, am I really as open-minded as I should be? Do I still have bias?
Going real liberal. That's it.
No, I'm serious, because and there are times that you don't even realize. There was one required class we were is this unconscious bias. We had to take this course about unconscious bias, and it was just like, I did real good on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then went, oops. And I didn't even realize that I had that particular bias. And so it's very important that, we talk about America, but you also mentioned global. You know, we are becoming a global society, whether we want to or not. We are on that path, and we're tied together financially, whether we like it or not. And whatever happens in this market has ripples on other markets and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, we have to learn how to respect each other. I think that that's the first step in truly being a diverse culture. Allowing people to be themselves without having to mold them into this utopian thing of what we think diversity and
Or human
inclusion
behavior
and
is,
human
right.
behavior is. Allow them to be themselves, and you accept me and I accept you.
Wow, this is such a really nice panel. I'm sorry, but I'm just enjoying.
I too was born in the 60s, and
Watch out,
you
there,
know,
old head.
I come from a Southern family with unspoken attitudes. My parents were never disrespectful to anybody else, but when it came to when I wanted to start branching out and having friends of different nationalities and races and stuff like that, it became an issue with my parents. And I just like, I can't live with your attitudes. I have to live my own life with my attitudes and my, you know, because I want to have friends. I want to have diverse friends. I want to learn about their culture. And, you know, I want to be able to taste their food. And, you know, I don't want it Americanized for me. Because, like you said, you know, there are Chinese restaurants. It is so Americanized, I don't think you're really eating Chinese.
That's Panda Express.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, but when you really
pretty
have,
good, though.
you know, an opportunity to actually have an
Yep,
authentic,
another one.
you know, whether it's food or whatever, have an authentic experience. It enriches you in a way you had no idea.
It's so funny you say that. I have a story. Actually, Boss Lady's planet. You know, the planet that she's on makes all the food, and many of the other people in the other planets are eating a lot of synthetic, you know, soy green type food, and they come to her planet. They've never eaten like real food before. And I told my son, I said, "You love fish. We live in South Florida. We're gonna go fishing to get a fish out the water." And he's like, "Oh," you know. And it reminds me of my first time seeing a goat killed.
Yeah.
You know, my father had a pet chicken, and I used to love chicken. You know, and
it changes after you.
it brings it home in a cool sort of way. But when you talked about being well-rounded people, exposing, I know my wife, she's a foodie as well, and we made it a point to expose my son to various different foods. And you know, it wasn't to shame any one cuisine, but that makes you feel like you're embracing all of Earth. You know, to be able to be exposed to it. So it's like integration was important. It wasn't just to bring people up to equality, but it was to expose everybody. And I know you have one. You're the last point. Then I got a good question next. Yes. So I'm going to let you go, sir. But can she make her comment first? Can you hold it?
Well, this is something going along with what Glenda said.
Okay. So it's a response to Glenda.
Yeah.
Okay. Real quick. You got it.
Yeah. I'm her husband.
Oh. And the filmmaker.
When she was talking about her parents and their attitudes, I was a mental health counselor at the time that we met. And I had some black friends at work that I wanted to come to our wedding. And her parents were very nice and very polite and very cordial to them when they met them. And after they had left, they point blank said, "I don't want them at the wedding."
Wow. So the way I you know, again, closest experience I could have that in my life was I worked in television production, and I worked at the Apollo Theater, and I worked wardrobe. Okay, so I wasn't the only male, but I was the only male, right? Because a lot of the men who were right, there were a lot of gay people within wardrobe, and we worked very close to makeup. And in the 90s, we still had the remnants of HIV. And a lot of people were, "Oh no, I don't want to do this." And again, I didn't really care. It was a big deal for me. I had a comedy night at a big gay club in the village. But a lot of people didn't want to be touched by them, didn't want to touch them. And so I understand, but like I told one of my friends, Teddy, he was a big makeup artist, he was a good example because he was so friendly, he was so open with it. And he was, if you've, I don't know how, we have so much variety now in our homosexual population, but those were like the really cool people to be ambassadors. Sometimes it takes those people that are open and upfront with dealing with people who haven't experienced it, that it knocks that wall of apprehension down. And some people we have to accept are dinosaurs and may never change. But for the other ones and for the future, there's more future than there is past. So we just plant seeds and the grandchildren will not be the same. All right, so yes.
So I promise not to go on long, but I have a few points that I've been writing down
Yes,
as people have been talking. So one thing is, I think that diversity is just so important for the health of our society. I mean, if you think about it, if you had a society that was all lawyers, first of all we'd do is argue and sue each other. But I mean, what happened when you needed a doctor or an engineer or, any number, or a teacher, or any number of things? So you need diversity to make a society work, to bring in new perspectives and new ideas and to go forward instead of stagnate. So to me, that is one of the most important things about diversity. But some to play on what you were just saying about just exposure and people just being kind of an ambassador or just being, my daughter is transgendered. I grew up in a very diehard Roman Catholic family, and I want to talk about that for a second. So religion is often one of the
Markers.
barriers to diversity because they want everybody to be like them.
Yes, it
And they
is.
want everybody to believe like them. They want everybody to be like them. They want everybody to see things the same way. And having been raised diehard Roman Catholic, it was such a shock when I went to college because I was an anthropology major. I love anthropology. And going to cultural anthropology and learning about ethnocentrism, which is seeing everybody else through your lens, which is what religion wants you to do.
Right.
I had these two warring perspectives that were that one that I had grown up with and one that I had taken on, and that was really me and the me I was becoming. Anyway,
You go, girl.
but I just want to I don't know. So maybe unpopular opinion, but I think religion very often can hold us back. Now there are universal or religions that try to be much more universal and much more accepting and much more adopting. And my perspective is really whatever you believe. I don't think. Well, anyway, whatever you believe, I don't really think there's one person judging and saying this is how it is. Even if you were raised Roman Catholic, in the Bible it says, if these people believe this and you believe this or whatever, then that is what's right for them because that is what they believe. That is their conscience tells them that is what's right for them. So right pretty much in the Bible it says, your way is not the only way.
Right.
And then that's what I believe. But I think that religion often can serve as a narrowing factor rather than I think what it should be, which is open your hearts to love to other people, love thy brother, all that. But as far as the exposure, so my diehard Roman Catholic family behaved in one of two ways to my daughter revealing that she was transgendered. It was either to mock and be horrible and absolutely horrible, and we've cut them out of our lives entirely, or people like my parents and my aunt and uncle and everything who all their lives were like, oh, why do they have to be gay? Or, you know what I mean? Just watching my daughter and her transformation, and I think a lot of us saw it a little bit before it came. They have grown and changed, and I think I don't think they would have grown and changed in their beliefs if they hadn't had somebody they loved and knew well come up in this journey. And so I think that's why it's important in fiction, the diversity in fiction and all of this is because we're taking other people on a journey with us and that we're expanding their horizons and their boundaries, and maybe they're going to be more sensitive or more understanding.
All right.
So.
Well, now
Can
we're
I
going
just mention, I'm glad you brought it back to literature,
Yes.
which is an important point. We have to decide, do we follow or do we lead? And good to lead.
Yeah.
Okay,
Good-
so
Good for your conscience anyway to lead.
I'm going to build on everything everybody has said. I have another good question, and there's such a blend of war battlefronts, whether it's Gamergate, it's Comic Gate that's going on now, or the one that we had in Sci-fi. Whatever I
Sick
Sad
puppies and the
puppies.
sad
yeah,
puppies.
I didn't want to call it that because I'm trying to think of the other name that we call it. We don't even call it anything. But now it's a chance for us to vent, right? Okay, because we had some real deep conversation. Now anybody can go first. All right, mix it up. I want you to give us an example of. This is like the Black Panther question, okay? So this is lighthearted. But I want you to take time, think of either a good example of diversity, or they got it really bad and this is what it's not supposed to be. Okay, you talked a little bit about
In literature or?
literature or in science fiction, whether it is video games, whether it is comic books, whether it is literature, whether it is TV or film. Okay, any of that. Just to give us kind of frame where we're going. So something that you really like, that they really got it right. This is where you really want it. So take a minute. It only one example. You don't have to give me one of each, or somewhere they really got it wrong, and you hope they don't go down that path ever again. And that's not what we're talking about. I mean, I'm thinking Stranger Things. I was talking to a panelist on another panel earlier about Mr. Glass and Samuel Jackson's character. And, you know, one of the things I'm not quick to jump and say, oh, that's a good example, is with him, because I think of almost like, is it Rogue or Raven? Which one is the X-Men that mutates?
Rogue that absorbs other people's powers.
No, not Rogue.
Raven, Mystique.
Mystique.
Raven,
There it is. I knew it wasn't the one I was thinking, because Raven is DC. Okay.
No, Raven is her name before she became.
Right. Okay. So
Before she started with
I've been watching this X-Men binge on AMC. Okay. Sorry. So Mystique is not fully embraced as transgender or bisexual or anything. So we can't claim her as a preeminent character for that form of diversity. Now, she can be used as that later on if their story of her origin or her life experiences leads it to that way. So it's a good opportunity for Marvel to do that. But for me, I would say a really cheesy example is going to be Luke Cage. The Netflix show,
Just got canceled.
which I'm going to be optimistic, because you understand I'm an optimistic person, okay? I think it was possible in expansion, because none of those shows was ever any one personal show, because Iron Fist was as much Daughters of the Dragon prequel as it was Iron Fist Season 2. So I think that Luke Cage may have gotten stopped short for Power Man and Iron Fist to be continued, or another Defenders, but I think they're so intertwined, they got to use all those actors up before they have to recast them, because they age out. But anyway, I say Luke Cage because I think it had what I write as the best example. As good as Black Panther is, but as a Black American, it had the urban environment. It had the urban issues. It had hip hop, R&B. It had our sounds. It had our cultures. Then it had our own issues, right? And in a way to say, hey, guess what? This is before Harlem got multiculturalized, right? This is still something that can be of interest to everybody. And that's really what I like. I don't want my Kung Fu movies to have the Indian, African, and European and the Native American. I like my Kung Fu movies to be, wushu versus shu. You know what I'm saying? My mantis is as good as your eagle's claw. And that's good for me, because I'm going to diversify my weekend viewing. So that's cool. Now, if they want to have a impact with Godzilla versus King Kong, then I'm open for that. But every movie doesn't have to be Godzilla versus King Kong, versus somebody else. Everything don't have to be like that. But sometimes they need to have a story where they get the whole experience in a capsule, correct? So then that can go in. So it's like a fully tomato flavored tomato going into the salad. You know, if you want to blend some other seasons and spices together, then that's another story. But so that's a good example for me. Now, and I think I gave a bad example. So now, hopefully, y'all have time to think, and that'll probably be our last question because we time it.
I think for a bad example, I would go right to Iron Fist.
Oh, there you
Because,
go.
and as somebody that has every Iron Fist original comic, the original concept of that way back when it wasn't done that well, but for its day, it was done well by putting a white person in this culture, embracing this culture, and then they just did it so bad on the television show that it's just a bad example of putting them together.
I can't really have an opinion because I didn't read them in the comic book, but I can testify to I hate slow Tai Chi. I'm a kung fu. I used to go see kung fu movies on 42nd Street, and I've seen Tai Chi. You know, they warm up slow, but they fight just as fast as every other style. And so Iron Fist got that wrong just on the on the martial arts.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
How about CW's Lightning?
Black Lightning.
Yeah. Actually, he had a really interesting quote in the comic book not that long ago because Static Shock. I don't know what has happened to that character, but I guess everybody keeps asking him why, how's your son? And he says, we're not even remotely related.
Right, they have the
So
same
it's the
powers.
assumption of race and power that seems to make everybody think he's their son. But I thought, I liked seeing him as a principal, as somebody who's keeping order, who was able to deal with multitude of different personalities and backgrounds. And I think it's interesting to see his daughters come into it. So I have to finish watching.
No spoilers because the seasons are still going on.
I thought it was. It's very human.
Okay, that's a good example. I like that. And he has one of the daughters is lesbian, so that works. Okay.
For doing it right, I mean, I mentioned that I represent N.K. Jemisin, so full disclosure, I do have skin in this game, but she's amazing, and she's got all kinds of diversity in her novels, not just, race and everything else, but sexuality and gender and all kinds of stuff. So she is one of the people absolutely doing it right. And Nettie Okafor as well, her Binti and
I
all,
second emotions because I didn't meet Nettie, but I did meet.
So definitely those are two people that are doing it right who I definitely would put on your reading list.
Okay. Rick, Glenda?
Rick Glenda.
Rick or Glenda. There was a comma in there. Anything that you just feel like you want to trash?
There's sort of a global thing going on that I was really impressed with, and it shows the sudden empowerment that comes from the Me Too movement. And that is when I think it's either Prime, but I think it's Netflix, where you're scrolling down and you see the rows of shows, and one of them now, a whole category is shows featuring strong female leads. And I thought, whoa, that's Netflix responding
to the need
to that. Yeah, and it's just an example. It's like an encouraging thing, that now there's this whole category like that. I know my wife loves that category.
Hey, we've had black themed search engine for a while, so I
but
search
just
me
an
on
example of
Amazon like that, so I don't mind.
Some of us think the country's trying to be dragged backward, and then you see that and you think, but there's a whole huge part of the country that's moving forward.
Yeah, we moving.
I think it's shaken us out of our comfort, we're doing pretty well, and then we see how far really we still have to come.
Yeah.
And I think it's making the other side pull harder. It's like a tug of war. Yeah, they yanked us back, but you know what? We had stopped fighting, and now we're pulling it back to hopefully where it needs to be and even more. Sorry.
And Glenda, good or bad or which part?
I have a good, what I feel is a good example because this actually challenged me. One of my favorite shows is Supergirl. And in the second season, when her adoptive sister turned out to be lesbian, that challenged me. But as the stories went on, and I'm not going to pretend to fully understand it because I don't, but I am keeping an open mind. I don't judge people because I don't know where they are in their life journey per se. But I thought that they really dealt with it in a very real manner. It wasn't the token lesbian character. They
Right.
brought on the girlfriend who they got engaged, and then her fiance's father had such, like you said, your family reacted in one of two ways. They either got really, really nasty, or they were supportive and loved her, to be her. And I thought that was beautiful that you shared that. Thank you. But I thought it was just, they really showed the perspectives of the one family who was ready to embrace her for who she was, and then the other family who had that just really difficult time accepting it. So that to me was a good example, as good as I've seen, because I've seen a lot of the
That's a
token.
few years ago, right now?
No, this is going on now.
Yeah.
Last
It's like,
season?
yeah, last season.
All right.
Yeah, because they're in the merge season coming up next
Yeah,
month
exactly,
with
yeah.
Flash and Green Arrow.
Yeah.
So that's coming up.
So, and then there was a real life example where I thought Hawaii Five-0, which was one of my favorite shows, until Grace Park and what's the other gentleman? Oriental. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but they did not return this season due to the fact that they challenged the fact that they were not being paid as much as the white actors. The story is set in Hawaii. It's a
Hawaii Five-0's now?
Hawaii Five-0,
Yeah, there
yes.
you go.
So when they lost
That was
that
easy.
battle, my husband and I made the decision to not watch it anymore, to support their decision that they stepped out and said, no, we're not going to contribute
Yeah, we're
to
outside.
this.
Yes.